We've got our code.py running our code, and we have the code that we want to run inside this file here, the demo_slider_key. So let me just open that file again. So now we can see this is the code that we want to run. This code.py is the code which is run at startup. If we want this file to be run, the simplest way we can do that is just by importing that file. So down here, I'll just take that out, if I write down here, if I write import demo_slider_key, you can say load Python file and run it. This import statement is going to basically load this file and run it. So now if I hit save, okay, so now we have our code running, and what you should see is that each of the buttons should illuminate in a different color, and the NeoSlider should change colors as you move it. So let's have a look at how that code works. So the first thing that we need to do is to import some of these libraries. So with the import statements, we can either import the entire library, or we can also import just specific functionality or little bits of code. So in this case here, we're saying from Adafruit NeoKey 1x4, import the NeoKey 1x4. This is the object that we're going to be able to use to talk to our physical NeoKeys. Down here, we're going to set up the I2C bus. Basically, the I2C bus is the bus that is connected to these wires, and it's called I2C because it's a way of interconnecting different integrated circuits. And the 4 wires that we have here, we've got power, ground, serial data, and serial clock. That's why there's 4 pins. And with that, we're able to daisy chain different daughter boards. So first things first is we say we're going to create the I2C bus, or connect to it. Next, we're going to connect to the NeoSlider, and to connect to the NeoSlider, we need to specify which bus we want to use. So we're going to use that I2C bus that we just created, and we need to say what address we want to connect to. So in this case, the address is 0x38. So this is the address that we set for the NeoSlider. If we had another NeoSlider, what we could do is we could do the same trick of cutting those jumpers on the back to set the address, but we would set a different address. So if I want to hook up another NeoSlider, what I would do is I would cut that jumper A3. That would set the address of this NeoSlider to 0x38, the same as this one. And then I could, for example, cut the A1, which would add in one more. And so then the address of this one would be 0x39. So the great thing about the I2C bus is it allows us to access quite a lot of different peripherals and boards, different kinds of boards. And basically all we need to do to access those is to have some kind of software that allows us to use the functionality and then connect to them over the I2C bus at a specific address. So for example, I could have 4 of these NeoSliders and maybe 2 of these NeoKey boards, as well as some sensors and other rotary encoders and stuff like that. But it still really just need those 4 wires, which is very convenient. Okay, so loaded the code for the NeoSlider, connected to the NeoSlider over the I2C bus, and then The I2C bus is going to allow us to read from the slider value, as well as for us to be able to change the colors of these NeoPixels. So there's some code that we need to run, and this is code that just came from the examples from the Adafruit page for the NeoSlider. Feel free to start from that code. It's pretty great. And basically, the NeoSlider we're going to access as an analog input as the input, and we're going to be able to write the pixels on the slider as NeoPixels. So basically, we've got 4 of these NeoPixels, and they're going to allow us to change each of these 4 NeoPixels. We can actually change the color individually. Then similarly for the NeoKey, we create a NeoKey object, and we say we want to attach the NeoKey object using the I2C bus, and it is at address 0x30. That is going to give us this NeoKey object. And then down here, the way that we actually access the value for each of those keys is just by using this array notation. So if I say NeoKey 0, it is going to give me the first NeoKey. If I see NeoKey 1, it's going to give me the value of the second key, and so on. So let's have a look at our serial monitor. And I just want to make sure that this serial debug is set to true. This is something that I added to control whether or not we're going to print the messages to the console. So let's just make sure we have the serial debug set to true and hit save. We can also clear the output of the serial monitor if you want. All right, so now let's hit save. I have seen that sometimes if you unplug your board and plug it back in, you may need to restart the serial monitor for whatever reason. I think it creates a new, because of the new connection. Yeah, unfortunately, I do see this error sometimes about the error on the SDA and SCL. And in these cases, you may need to actually unplug the board and plug it back in to kind of give everything a full reset. I did have to reset it a couple times. And now we can see if I press this button A here, it's setting this value to true. And I'm printing this message. And I am setting the NeoPixels to have this key turn red. If I press the next button here, button 1, that is setting NeoKey 1 to true. I'm printing the message, and I am changing this color as well. Similarly, we can get the last 2 keys here. This one is setting the color to green, and this last one is setting it to a kind of a teal. So the basic logic here is we have a while loop, while true. This is our main loop that our code is running. And in here, we're basically just checking each of the buttons and changing the color, as well as printing a message. The numbers that we're printing here, we're just printing the value that we're receiving from the NeoSlider. So you can see here, if I've got it going to the top, it's getting 0, and as I bring it down to the bottom, it's going up to 1023. If I want to switch those values, I could physically switch it around, or I could also just do that in my code. So we can read from the value of the slider just by calling this line here, potentiometer.value. And for the NeoPixels on the slider, I just call pixels.fill, and I've got a little bit of code there to translate the position of the slider into the colors to fill. So for example, if I could simply fill the NeoSlider with red, I would just call pixels.fill, and then here I could say 0xFF0000. So this is an RGB value. You can look up these values online. Now if I save my code, unfortunately I might have to hit reset a couple times to get it to run. Some kind of startup error sometimes with the I2C bus. Yeah, so now we can see that I've got my code running and the NeoPixel is completely set to red. If I change this to 00FF00, this is all green. Now I hit save. And we can see that the fader is now green. So it's relatively straightforward to access the value of the potentiometer and to set the values of those pixels. So I could also just do something really simple here. I could say if potentiometer dot value is greater than 512. I could say pixels dot fill 0xFF00, right? Set slider to red in lower half of travel. And then here I could say else, and I could use the green. So basically this little bit of logic here is I'm going to check what is the current position of the slider, and if it's greater than 512 I'm going to set it to red, and otherwise I'm going to set it to green. And now if we look at our slider, you can see in the top half it's green and in the bottom half it is red. So this is the basic process for accessing the buttons and the slider, is that we can basically access the value of the buttons in an array, and we can access the value of the slider just as a potentiometer value, and we can set the colors of the slider or the buttons by doing operations like we would on NeoPixels. So this should get you to the point where the code on your board is working. And then next, we're actually going to look at how we can start to send MIDI notes as well as use the screen.